5 true scary stories from haunted hospitals. Ghostly encounters that will haunt you. The abandoned Mercy Springs Hospital loomed on the outskirts of town, a crumbling monument to forgotten dreams and whispered horrors. Its once white facade was now a patchwork of peeling paint and ivy, creeping like fingers up the walls. The windows, dark and hollow, resembled sunken eyes that had witnessed too much suffering and death. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the grounds, a chill settled in the air, making even the bravest souls hesitant to draw near. Stories of ghostly apparitions and eerie sounds floated through the town like fog. Echoes of phantom footsteps in the halls, disembodied voices calling out for help, and the unsettling feeling of being watched. Rumors circulated like wildfire, fueled by the memories of patients who had suffered there and the restless spirits believed to linger in the shadows. Locals whispered about the night shift workers who claimed to see ghostly figures flitting through the wards, and the inexplicable occurrences that left staff trembling. The hospital, once a beacon of hope for the sick, had become a site of dread, and many wondered if the souls of those who had passed through its doors were still trapped within. Amidst the fading paint and haunting tales stood Dr. Sarah Reynolds, a fresh medical intern eager to prove herself. With dreams of saving lives and making a difference, she had come to Mercy Springs, determined to tackle the challenges of the medical field head-on. However, as she stepped through the decaying entrance, she could not shake the sense of unease that wrapped around her like a shroud. Her logical mind dismissed the ghost stories as mere folklore, but a flicker of doubt lingered. What if there was more truth to the tales than she wanted to believe? The very walls of this hospital seemed to whisper secrets, begging to be uncovered. Sarah's first night on the job was typical of any new intern. Nervous excitement coupled with a desire to impress her superiors. She moved through the stark hallways, the fluorescent lights flickering intermittently, casting eerie shadows that danced across the floor. As she settled into the night shift, she joined a group of nurses in the break room, the faint sound of laughter echoing against the sterile walls. It was there, amidst the camaraderie and shared exhaustion, that the conversation took a dark turn. The nurses exchanged ghost stories, each tale more chilling than the last. They spoke of phantom surgeons who appeared during emergencies, of medical equipment that operated without human hands, and of the restless spirits of former patients wandering the hospital's halls. Sarah listened, her skepticism battling against her curiosity. Each story was laced with chilling details that stirred something deep within her, a nagging sensation that perhaps there was more to these tales than she had initially thought. "Don't tell me you believe in all that nonsense," one of the nurses teased, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "You'll see soon enough. This place has a history, and it loves to remind us of it." Intrigued and somewhat unnerved, Sarah made a decision that would alter the course of her time at Mercy Springs. She would dig deeper, unravel the threads of these stories, and uncover the truth hidden within the hospital's walls. Driven by a mix of ambition and a growing sense of mystery, she resolved to investigate the hauntings, to confront the darkness that lingered, and perhaps, in doing so, to find her own place in the legacy of Mercy Springs. The ghosts of the past were calling, and Sarah was determined to answer. Story 1. Phantom Surgeons. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah became increasingly enmeshed in the haunting atmosphere of Mercy Springs Hospital. The stories of ghostly apparitions had ignited a curiosity within her, compelling her to explore the darker corners of the hospital's history. One evening, while preparing for a particularly hectic night shift, she overheard a conversation between 2 seasoned doctors. They spoke in hushed tones about the legendary phantom surgeon, a spirit said to appear in the operating room during critical emergencies, performing surgeries with an otherworldly precision. Some say he was a brilliant surgeon who died during a failed operation, but his spirit refuses to leave. One doctor murmured, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear. He appears when the situation is dire, saving patients who would otherwise be lost. Intrigued yet skeptical, Sarah filed this information away in her mind. As a medical intern, she had been trained to rely on evidence, on science. But as the stories piled up, she felt her rationality waver. What if there was a kernel of truth in these urban legends? That night, Sarah's shift began quietly, a stark contrast to the chaos she had anticipated. The hospital felt unusually still, as though it was holding its breath. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, however, an urgent call broke the silence. An ambulance had arrived, bringing in a patient who had suffered a severe trauma from a car accident. The trauma team sprang into action, and Sarah found herself swept up in the frantic energy of the emergency room. Amidst the chaos, Sarah noticed something strange. Just as the team prepared to operate, the room filled with an inexplicable chill. The lights flickered, and shadows seemed to flicker along the walls. Then, from the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of a figure, a man dressed in an old-fashioned surgeon's coat, his features obscured by the dim light. He moved with purpose, positioning himself at the operating table. And before she could fully process what was happening, he began to direct the team with a calm authority that was both comforting and surreal. In that moment, time seemed to slow. Sarah watched in awe as the phantom surgeon moved with grace and expertise, his hands deftly guiding the other doctors through a series of complicated maneuvers. It was as if he were an extension of the medical team, an expert who had simply stepped out of a time long forgotten. The patient, pale and unresponsive, was stabilized under this ghostly surgeon's touch. When the operation concluded, the team erupted into applause, relief washing over them. They had saved the patient against all odds. But as Sarah turned to congratulate the others, she glanced back at the surgeon, her heart racing with a mixture of gratitude and dread. The figure had vanished. She rushed to the operating log to find documentation of the procedure and the identity of the surgeon. But to her shock, there was no record of any such operation. No names, no details. It was as if the event had never happened at all. As Sarah stepped out of the operating room, her mind was racing. She had witnessed something miraculous, something that transcended the boundaries of life and death. Yet it left her with more questions than answers. Could it be that the stories were true? The thought sent shivers down her spine. What did it mean to witness a ghost saving a life? In the days that followed, Sarah grappled with her disbelief and the undeniable evidence of what she had experienced. She recalled the stunned expressions of her colleagues and the inexplicable relief that washed over the room when the patient's vital signs stabilized. A part of her wanted to dismiss the encounter as a trick of the light, a figment of her imagination fueled by the stress of the job. Yet another part, the part that had always yearned for more than the mundane, was captivated by the notion that there could be something greater at work. The implications weighed heavily on her. Was the phantom surgeon a guardian spirit, a remnant of a life dedicated to healing? Or was it something darker? The ethical ramifications of such a being operating without consent, without records, gnawed at her. What did it mean for the integrity of the medical profession if miracles could occur without accountability? Could she reconcile the wonder of such an event with the strict moral codes she had sworn to uphold? Sarah found herself torn between the awe of the experience and the implications it raised about her beliefs and her work. The phantom surgeon had saved a life, but at what cost? Would she be able to accept the possibility of the supernatural? Or would she cling to the logic and reason that had guided her thus far? Determined to seek answers, Sarah resolved to investigate further. She would delve into the hospital's archives, uncover its past, and confront the spectral presence that had stepped into her reality. As she navigated the complex web of stories, she felt an undeniable connection to the place and its history, a pull that drew her deeper into the mysteries of Mercy Springs, where the lines between life and death, reality and the supernatural, began to blur. Story 2. Haunted medical equipment. After her harrowing experience with the phantom surgeon, Sarah's perspective on Mercy Springs Hospital shifted dramatically. The lingering questions of what she had witnessed were compounded by a growing unease about the hospital's enigmatic past. But for now, her responsibilities as a medical intern demanded her attention. As she settled into her routine, she began to notice peculiarities that left her increasingly unsettled. During one late-night shift, as Sarah performed a routine check of the operating rooms, she felt the oppressive weight of the building's history surrounding her. The air was thick with a chilling silence that seemed to seep from the walls, and an unshakable sense of being watched prickled at the back of her neck. Flickering lights cast eerie shadows that danced across the sterile surfaces, and the hum of the fluorescent bulbs overhead created an unsettling atmosphere. As she entered the first operating room, Sarah's eyes were drawn to the surgical instruments neatly laid out on the stainless steel table. Everything appeared in its place, but as she approached, she noticed something odd. A scalpel lay slightly askew, as if someone had recently used it but forgotten to return it to its proper position. A rush of adrenaline surged through her veins as she hesitated, recalling the ghost stories whispered among the staff. Gathering her courage, she stepped closer and picked it up. The moment her fingers brushed the cold metal, an electric jolt surged through her, and the scalpel sprang to life. It vibrated in her grasp, as if infused with energy, and a low humming sound filled the room. Sarah gasped, instinctively dropping the instrument, but it floated momentarily in the air before clattering back onto the table. The sensation of a chilling presence enveloped her, as though an unseen force had materialized in the room, observing her every move. Her heart raced as she glanced around, half expecting to see a ghostly figure emerging from the shadows. Was this the spirit of a long-lost surgeon, still wielding the tools of their trade? The scalpel lay motionless now, but the air felt charged with a presence that set her teeth on edge. She stepped back, her mind racing as she wrestled with the implications of what she had just experienced. The unpredictability of the equipment unnerved her, forcing her to confront her deepest fears about the unknown. Determined not to succumb to panic, Sarah approached the table again. She grabbed a nearby surgical tray, lined with instruments, and held it up like a shield as she prepared to inspect the equipment further. To her astonishment, she noticed that other instruments were also positioned oddly, some slightly askew as if they had been hastily used. A pair of forceps moved on their own, sliding toward her with an unsettling ease. "This isn't happening," Sarah muttered under her breath, shaking her head in disbelief. But as she gripped the tray tighter, the monitor attached to the surgical bed flickered on, displaying a cascade of garbled data, numbers and graphs that bore no semblance of anything she recognized. Her heart pounded as she realized that the machines were behaving erratically, reflecting a chaotic energy that seemed beyond the realm of the normal. The lights flickered again, casting erratic shadows across the room, and a cold wind swept through, despite the absence of an open window. Sarah could feel the hairs on her arms stand on end, and a deep, primal fear gripped her. The fragility of life and death weighed heavily on her shoulders. In this sacred space of healing, what could she truly trust? Summoning her resolve, Sarah turned to the medical equipment, an unsettling mix of dread and determination coursing through her. She understood that she could not simply ignore the strange occurrences. The hospital itself seemed to be alive, its very tools imbued with stories of those who had come before, surgeons, nurses, patients, each leaving a trace of their existence behind. But what did it mean that these tools were now manifesting their energy in such a chaotic manner? Over the following days, Sarah made it her mission to document the anomalies she experienced. Each night's shift became an exercise in confronting her fears as she noted the strange behavior of the equipment. Monitors flickered with unreadable data. Surgical tools would inexplicably shift positions, and sometimes she could swear she heard whispers emanating from the shadows. She sought out her fellow interns, sharing her experiences and urging them to pay attention. But while some shrugged it off as overactive imaginations fueled by exhaustion, others began to share their own eerie encounters. Sarah's determination only deepened as she combed through hospital records, searching for any explanation of the hospital's past. As she pieced together stories from former staff members, she learned about a tragic event, an accident during a routine procedure years ago that had claimed the lives of several patients and a well-respected surgeon. The hospital had never truly recovered from that day, and Sarah began to wonder if the lingering energy of those lost souls was manifesting through the very equipment designed to save lives. One night, during another late shift, Sarah returned to the operating room, feeling drawn back to the place where her unsettling experiences had begun. She felt a chill in the air, stronger than before, as if the ghosts of the past were beckoning her. Stepping inside, she noticed the scalpel again lying on the table, this time perfectly still. A sense of urgency washed over her, compelling her to confront the truth of what she had experienced. As she picked it up once more, the room seemed to pulse with energy. This time, she closed her eyes and focused on the stories that had been shared, on the lives saved and lost within these walls. She reached out, hoping to connect with the spirit of the surgeon who had once wielded this tool, seeking understanding. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "I want to help. What do you need?" In that moment, the air around her thickened, and the monitor flickered back to life, displaying a heartbeat, steady and strong. Tears prickled at the corners of Sarah's eyes as she felt a profound sense of connection to the countless lives that had passed through the hospital. The presence surrounding her seemed to shift, a warm embrace of gratitude enveloping her, dispelling her fears. The erratic behavior of the medical equipment transformed in that instant, becoming a reminder of the lives intertwined within the fabric of the hospital. Sarah realized that these spectral occurrences were not malevolent forces. They were echoes of hope, reminders of the fragility of existence, urging her to continue fighting for the lives that remained. As she stepped away from the table, the scalpel fell from her fingers, landing softly back on the operating surface. It seemed to settle into place, and for the first time, Sarah felt a sense of peace in the chaotic energy of the hospital. The ghosts of Mercy Springs Hospital had a story to tell, and she was ready to listen. Story 3: Haunted Hospital Basements. Whispers of the Mercy Springs Hospital basement had long been a source of dread and curiosity among the staff and interns. Once the site of experimental procedures deemed too controversial for the upper floors, the basement was shrouded in darkness, both literally and figuratively. With its low ceilings and flickering fluorescent lights, it had become a place of urban legends, where the spirits of former patients were said to linger, their pain echoing off the cold, damp walls. The rumors varied. Some claimed to hear cries for help, while others spoke of shadowy figures flitting just beyond the reach of light. On one particularly restless night, Sarah found herself amidst a group of fellow interns in the staff lounge. Their laughter mingled with nervous chatter as they recounted tales of the basement's haunted history, each story more chilling than the last. As they exchanged daring glances, one intern, Brian, suggested they explore the basement together. The challenge hung in the air like a heavy fog, and despite her better judgment, Sarah felt an irresistible pull to join the group. It was as if the very essence of the hospital was drawing her toward the unknown. "Come on, Sarah. Don't be a chicken," Brian urged, his grin wide and mischievous. The group rallied around him, egging her on, and before she could second-guess her decision, she found herself nodding in agreement. "Fine," she said, steeling her nerves. "But if I hear any weird noises, I'm out of there." The group descended the staircase leading to the basement, the fluorescent lights overhead flickering ominously as they stepped deeper into the heart of the hospital. The atmosphere shifted palpably, the air thickening as they entered the basement corridor, each step echoing off the walls like a heartbeat. Sarah's pulse quickened, a mix of excitement and trepidation coursing through her. The first room they entered was lined with old equipment, dust-covered and forgotten. Sarah glanced at the rusted instruments, remnants of a time when ethics seemed less of a concern than medical advancement. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was intruding on a sacred space where unspeakable suffering had once taken place. The silence felt heavy, pressing down on her as the group moved further in. "Look over there!" Another intern, Jenna, called out, pointing toward a door at the end of the corridor, slightly ajar. The door seemed to beckon them, its cracked frame barely concealing the darkness within. Sarah hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to turn back. "Maybe we should just head back," she suggested weakly, but the others were already pushing forward. As they entered the room, a chill enveloped them, and the shadows seemed to shift. The air was dense with the remnants of pain and anguish, and Sarah felt an unsettling sensation creep over her. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them, and the lights flickered once more, plunging the room into semi-darkness. A collective gasp filled the air, and Sarah's heart raced. Then, from the corner of the room, she saw them. Hazy figures emerging from the shadows, their faces twisted in expressions of anguish and sorrow. The specters of those who had suffered in silence materialized before them, their forms flickering like candle flames. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized the stories had been true. The basement was indeed haunted by the spirits of former patients who had endured unimaginable trials. The spirits hovered, their eyes filled with a deep, penetrating sadness that struck Sarah to her core. In that moment, she felt the weight of their pain wash over her like a torrent, a visceral reminder of the ethics she had sworn to uphold as a future physician. They had been patients once, human beings with hopes and dreams, reduced to mere subjects in the pursuit of knowledge. The haunting realization gnawed at her conscience. Their suffering had been disregarded, and now they lingered, trapped in a cycle of torment. "Please help us," one of the spirits whispered, its voice echoing in her mind. The plea reverberated through her, igniting a fire within her heart. "We were forgotten." The words pierced through the veil of fear, igniting a profound sense of empathy in Sarah. With a deep breath, Sarah stepped forward, her fear transformed into resolve. "I hear you," she said softly, her voice trembling yet steady. "I won't forget you. I promise to honor your memory." Her heart raced as she felt an overwhelming urge to communicate the stories of these souls to the world. She could no longer view her role as a doctor as merely a profession. It was a calling, a responsibility to those who could no longer speak for themselves. The spirits shifted, their forms swirling around her as if acknowledging her vow. The room felt alive, charged with an energy that pulsed with hope, and for a brief moment, the anguish faded from their faces. Sarah realized that her journey was not just about healing the living. It was also about giving voice to the silent echoes of the past. Just then, a loud bang resounded against the door, startling the group. The spirits hesitated, their forms flickering uncertainly. The others began to panic, shouting for the door to open. Sarah turned back to them, urging calm. "We have to listen to them," she shouted above the commotion. "They're trying to tell us something." But the fear was palpable, and as the spirits began to retreat into the shadows, the interns pushed toward the door, desperate to escape the basement's grip. With a final glance over her shoulder, Sarah felt a bittersweet pang in her heart as the spirits dissolved back into the darkness. She knew she would return. She had to. As they finally managed to pry the door open and rush out into the dimly lit corridor, Sarah's mind swirled with thoughts of what she had just witnessed. The experience had reshaped her understanding of her purpose as a doctor and the profound implications of the medical profession. It was about compassion, empathy, and remembering those who had suffered at the hands of practices that often prioritize progress over humanity. Outside, in the dim light of the hallway, her fellow interns continued to chatter about the experience, a mix of adrenaline and fear fueling their excitement. But Sarah remained quiet, contemplating the weight of the spirit's sorrow. She felt a newfound sense of purpose rising within her, a determination to advocate for ethical practices in medicine, to ensure that the stories of the lost would never again fade into silence. That night marked a turning point in Sarah's journey, igniting a passion within her that would guide her throughout her career. She understood now that every patient carried a story, a history of hope, suffering, and resilience, and it was her duty to honor that legacy. The basement might be haunted, but it was also a place of profound lessons, reminders of the ethical obligations she carried as a healer. As she lay in bed that night, she felt a sense of peace settling over her. The spirits may have lingered in the shadows, but she vowed to be their voice, to carry their memories into the light, ensuring that no one else would ever suffer in silence again. The haunted hospital basements were no longer just a source of fear. They had become a sanctuary of stories waiting to be told. Story 4: Spirits of Former Patients. As the days went by at Mercy Springs Hospital, the haunting experiences began to weave themselves into the fabric of Sarah Reynolds' life. Each night, the echoes of her encounters with the spirits became more vivid, haunting her dreams and leaving her with a relentless curiosity about the dark history hidden within the hospital's walls. The air of the hospital was thick with unspoken stories, and Sarah felt an unshakable urge to listen to those who had been silenced. One fateful evening, after a long and exhausting shift, Sarah found herself wandering the dimly lit halls once again, drawn by an invisible thread toward the pediatric wing. This section of the hospital had always felt particularly heavy, its walls echoing with the laughter of children that was now replaced by silence. She walked past the empty rooms. Her heart felt heavy, weighed down by the loss of lives that had once filled these spaces with joy and hope. Suddenly, Sarah heard a soft, childlike voice calling out to her. "Help me!" The plea was barely a whisper, yet it pierced through the silence like a knife. She turned, her breath hitching in her throat as she spotted a young girl standing at the end of the hallway. The child was translucent, her features delicate and ethereal, but there was an undeniable sadness in her eyes that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. "Who are you?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling as she approached the girl. The child looked up, her gaze filled with a haunting mixture of longing and despair. "I'm Lily," she said softly, her voice like the rustling of leaves. "I used to be a patient here. I need your help." Sarah's heart ached as she knelt to the girl's level, trying to make sense of the apparition before her. "What happened to you, Lily?" she pressed gently, feeling a deep sense of compassion rising within her. Lily's spirit flickered slightly, the sadness in her eyes deepening. "I died during a procedure. They said it was routine, but it went wrong. They didn't listen to me when I said I was scared. They didn't care." Her voice wavered, and Sarah could see the pain etched across her ethereal face. "I want people to know the truth. I want someone to remember me." The weight of Lily's words crashed over Sarah like a tidal wave. Here was a young girl, a victim of negligence, still trapped in a world where her suffering had gone unnoticed. "I will help you," Sarah promised, her resolve hardening. "I will find out what happened." As they spoke, the hospital around them seemed to dim further, the shadows deepening as if the very walls were holding their breath. "Thank you," Lily whispered, a small flicker of hope igniting in her gaze. "I've been waiting so long for someone to listen. I just want peace." "Tell me everything you remember," Sarah urged, feeling a connection to this innocent soul who had endured so much. "I want to understand what happened to you." Lily began to recount her story, painting a picture of her time at the hospital, a bright child with dreams of becoming a doctor one day. Her laughter had once filled the halls, and her excitement for life had been infectious. But then came the day of her procedure, a seemingly simple appendectomy that spiraled into chaos. "They didn't take my concerns seriously," she explained, her voice trembling. "I was in so much pain, but they kept telling me it was all in my head." As Lily spoke, Sarah felt a deep surge of emotion. She understood, more than ever, the importance of listening to patients and validating their fears. In that moment, her purpose crystallized. The very essence of her training as a doctor was about advocating for those who could not advocate for themselves. "They said it was a complication," Lily continued, her eyes glistening with tears. "But I think it was negligence. I just want everyone to know what really happened. I don't want my life to be forgotten." Determined to help Lily find peace, Sarah promised her that she would investigate the circumstances surrounding her death. The young girl smiled faintly, a shimmer of gratitude lighting up her ethereal form. "Thank you," she repeated, her voice a soft echo. "You'll never know how much this means to me." As the conversation came to an end, Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility settle over her. She knew she had to dig deeper into the hospital's records and uncover the truth behind Lily's tragic fate. With each revelation, she could help shed light on the darker practices that had contributed to the suffering of many patients, including Lily. As they parted ways, Lily's spirit slowly began to fade, her presence still lingering in the air like the scent of flowers. "I'll be waiting," she whispered, a soft breeze carrying her words. Don't forget me. Returning to her small apartment that night, Sarah felt a surge of energy coursing through her veins. She was fueled by the memory of Lily and the desire to honor her spirit. She pored over the hospital's records, searching for any indication of malpractice or negligence surrounding the case. Hours turned into days as she navigated the bureaucratic labyrinth of medical documentation, uncovering inconsistencies that hinted at a cover-up. The more she uncovered, the more she realized that Lily was not alone. There were other names, other faces, victims of a system that had failed to protect its patients. Each discovery weighed heavily on her heart, amplifying her resolve to be a voice for those who had been silenced. Driven by a growing urgency, Sarah reached out to Lily's family, determined to help them find closure. She arranged a meeting with them, explaining the little girl's story and the injustices she had faced. To her surprise, the family was not only willing to listen, but were also eager to share their own experiences of frustration and heartbreak. They too had sensed something amiss with Lily's care, but they had never been able to put their finger on it. Together, they began to piece together a narrative, a collective memory that refused to be forgotten. It was not merely about seeking justice for Lily. It became a movement for all the patients who had suffered at the hands of negligence. Sarah felt an incredible weight lift from her shoulders as she worked alongside Lily's family, driven by a shared purpose and the unwavering belief that every story deserved to be heard. As news of their investigation began to spread, more families came forward, emboldened by Sarah's bravery and determination. Each story was a thread woven into the fabric of a larger narrative, a tapestry of hope, healing, and the quest for accountability. Sarah had ignited a spark, and together they were lighting the way for others to follow. Finally, the day came when they stood together, united to share their stories publicly. Sarah spoke passionately, her voice resonating with conviction as she recounted Lily's tale, her heart pounding in her chest. The audience was captivated, and as she spoke of the negligence and the need for change within the medical community, she could feel the energy in the room shift. For Sarah, it was not just about unveiling the truth. It was about honoring Lily's memory and giving her the voice she had longed for. The girl's spirit was present with her in that moment, guiding her every word and strengthening her resolve. As the crowd erupted in applause, Sarah looked around, feeling a profound sense of connection to everyone present. They were there not just as individuals, but as part of a collective journey, a commitment to ensure that no one else would have to endure the suffering that had plagued so many before them. In the days and weeks that followed, the momentum continued to build. Investigations were launched, and protocols began to change. The stories of the former patients echoed through the halls of Mercy Springs Hospital, transforming it from a place of pain to one of healing and remembrance. Though the journey was long and arduous, Sarah felt a sense of fulfillment that she had never experienced before. She had embraced her calling, not just as a doctor, but as an advocate for justice, compassion, and ethical medical practices. The spirits of former patients, including Lily, had become her guiding lights, reminding her of the humanity that lay at the heart of medicine. As she looked out over the hospital grounds, she knew that the spirits would always be with her, whispering their stories and urging her to continue her mission. In her heart, she carried the promise she had made to Lily, to never forget, to always listen, and to advocate fiercely for those who had been silenced. Sarah Reynolds was no longer just a medical intern. She had become a beacon of hope, illuminating the path toward a more compassionate and just healthcare system. Story 5. Ghostly nurses in the hallways. The nights at Mercy Springs Hospital had taken on a strange rhythm for Sarah Reynolds. With each shift, she felt increasingly intertwined with the stories of the past that echoed through its decaying halls. The whispers of patients who had suffered, the shadows of those who had cared for them, and the lingering spirits who roamed the corridors created a tapestry of both sorrow and solace. As the moon hung high in the night sky, Sarah found herself captivated by the lore surrounding the ghostly nurses, spirits said to wander the hallways, still dedicated to their patients, even in death. One evening, during the late shift, Sarah's attention was drawn to a familiar, yet unsettling, chill in the air. The hospital was unusually quiet, the usual hum of medical equipment replaced by a heavy silence that seemed to press in on her. As she walked through the dimly lit corridor of the geriatric wing, a fleeting shadow caught her eye. It moved gracefully, almost ethereally, down the hall. Intrigued, Sarah followed, her heart racing in both anticipation and trepidation. The figure turned into a room at the far end of the corridor, and Sarah hesitated at the doorway, peering inside. There, she saw an elderly patient, Mr. Thompson, who had been admitted with severe pneumonia. His frail form lay shivering beneath the thin hospital blanket, his eyes filled with confusion and fear. It was then that Sarah noticed the ghostly figure hovering beside him, a nurse clad in an old-fashioned uniform, her presence both calming and haunting. "Help him," the nurse urged softly, her voice echoing like a distant lullaby. "He needs you." Stunned, Sarah stepped into the room, drawn by the nurse's urgency. "What's wrong, Mr. Thompson?" she asked, her voice steady despite the surreal situation. I can't breathe," he gasped, his voice barely above a whisper. Panic surged within Sarah as she moved quickly to check his vitals. The nurse, seemingly aware of every movement, guided Sarah's hands toward the appropriate equipment. Sarah's training kicked in, and she felt an undeniable connection to the spectral caregiver. As Sarah worked, the ghostly nurse hovered close, watching intently. "He fought so hard," she whispered, her gaze unwavering. "Don't let him slip away." In that moment, Sarah realized the depth of the nurse's dedication, even after death. It was a commitment that transcended the boundaries of life and death, a testament to the bond formed between caregiver and patient. Working together, Sarah was able to stabilize Mr. Thompson, administering oxygen and ensuring he was comfortable. The ghostly nurse remained at her side, silently guiding her as they fought to keep the elderly man alive. "Thank you," Sarah breathed, glancing at the apparition, whose expression reflected both relief and sorrow. However, as the crisis abated, the nurse's form began to flicker like a candle flame. Sarah felt a pang of sadness as she realized that the nurse's time in the living world was coming to an end. "Wait," she called out, desperately wishing to understand more. "Who are you? Why are you here?" The nurse smiled gently, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I was Sister Agnes. I served here many years ago. I lost my life in a tragic accident, but I could not leave without helping those in need." Sarah's heart ached as she listened to Sister Agnes's story, the pieces of the nurse's past falling into place like fragments of a haunting melody. The tragedy of her death, coupled with her undying dedication to her patients, struck a deep chord within Sarah. "You still care for them," Sarah murmured, a newfound respect swelling in her chest. "Always," Sister Agnes affirmed, her voice a soft breeze. "The spirit of care doesn't fade with the body. It lives on in the hearts of those who continue to heal." As the reality of Sister Agnes's words sank in, Sarah felt an overwhelming mix of emotions. Here was a woman who had devoted her life to nursing, her spirit refusing to abandon her vocation even after death. It challenged everything Sarah thought she knew about the afterlife. What did it mean to care? What was the true essence of life, if not the relationships we forge and the love we share? With one last lingering glance at Mr. Thompson, whose eyes were now beginning to shine with gratitude, Sister Agnes began to fade. "You have a gift, dear one," she said, her voice barely a whisper now. "Continue to honor it, and remember, every patient is a soul worth saving." As the ghostly nurse vanished completely, leaving behind a feeling of warmth, Sarah felt a wave of inspiration wash over her. The encounter had transformed her understanding of her role as a physician. It was not merely a profession. It was a calling, a commitment to uphold the dignity and humanity of those in her care. In the following days, Sarah found herself reflecting on the spirit of Sister Agnes and the legacy of care that transcended time and death. She felt empowered to carry forward that legacy, to be a voice for her patients, and to advocate fiercely for their well-being. The presence of the ghostly nurses no longer felt like mere stories to frighten interns. They were reminders of the relentless spirit of care that existed within the walls of Mercy Springs Hospital. As she moved through her shifts, Sarah made it her mission to foster an environment of compassion, ensuring that her patients felt seen, heard, and valued. She took time to sit with them, to listen to their fears, and to share their stories. In doing so, she honored not only the spirits of the past, but also the living souls who entrusted their lives to her care. With each passing day, the hospital began to transform, slowly shedding its haunted reputation and becoming a sanctuary for healing. The stories of the ghostly nurses spread among the staff, and rather than invoking fear, they sparked a movement toward compassion. Sarah organized meetings, encouraging her colleagues to share their own encounters, creating a safe space for them to express their experiences and embrace the profound connections that lay at the heart of their work. Through this shared storytelling, the hospital staff began to cultivate a culture of empathy and understanding, reinforcing the idea that every interaction mattered. They committed themselves to remembering the lives that had once flourished within the hospital, ensuring that the lessons of the past would guide them into the future. On one particularly quiet night, as Sarah made her rounds, she paused in front of the window overlooking the hospital grounds. The moonlight bathed the building in a soft glow, illuminating the spaces that had once felt so dark. She thought of Sister Agnes and all the other spirits who had shaped her journey. In her heart, she knew they were with her, urging her to continue her mission of care and compassion. And so, as Sarah stood there, she vowed to honor their memory, not only in her practice, but also in the very essence of her being. She understood now that life was not solely about the number of patients saved or procedures completed. It was about the connections forged, the stories shared, and the lives touched. With every heartbeat, she carried forth the legacy of the ghostly nurses who roamed the hallways, embodying the undying commitment to care that would forever resonate in the spirit of Mercy Springs Hospital. As the dawn light filtered through the grimy windows of Mercy Springs Hospital, Dr. Sarah Reynolds stood alone in the quiet of the now familiar hallways, the echoes of the previous nights swirling in her mind like the dust motes dancing in the golden light. Her journey through the haunting stories that had unfolded within these walls had been transformative, reshaping not only her understanding of her profession, but also her perception of life and death. Reflecting on the stories she had encountered, the phantom surgeon, the haunted medical equipment, the basement spirits, the young girl seeking closure, and the ghostly nurses wandering the halls, Sarah felt a profound connection to the history of the hospital. Each tale was steeped in sorrow and resilience, revealing not just the ghosts of the past, but the sacrifices made by both the staff and patients who had once called this place home. The spirits she had met were more than mere specters. They were embodiments of compassion, regret, and hope, whispering lessons that transcended their mortal existence. The phantom surgeon had illustrated the miraculous thin line between life and death, showcasing the unwavering dedication that could defy even the finality of mortality. The erratic behavior of the medical equipment had forced Sarah to confront the fragility of life, pushing her to reconcile her fears of the unknown with her duty as a healer. The chilling encounter in the basement had laid bare the injustices of the past, urging her to remember the voices of those who had suffered in silence. The young girl's longing for truth had deepened Sarah's empathy, reminding her that each patient was a story, a life with hopes and dreams that deserved recognition and care. Finally, the ghostly nurses had personified the essence of nursing, the unyielding commitment to care that could not be extinguished even in death, inspiring Sarah to embody that same spirit in her practice. As Sarah contemplated these narratives, she recognized the underlying themes that connected them all. Compassion stood at the forefront, guiding her actions and decisions as she navigated the complexities of healthcare. The importance of remembering those who had suffered resonated deeply, pushing her to honor their stories by ensuring that their experiences would not fade into obscurity. Each narrative posed ethical dilemmas that she knew would challenge her throughout her career, decisions that required her to weigh the sanctity of life against the realities of medical limitations and the weight of responsibility she carried as a physician. In her final thoughts, Sarah embraced the haunting nature of the hospital as a bittersweet reminder of the past. The spirits who lingered were not merely seeking to instill fear. They were urging her to be a better doctor, to approach her work with a profound sense of reverence for the lives she touched. She understood now that life and death were intertwined, a complex tapestry woven together by the threads of human experience. Even in death, the stories of the past continued to impact the living, reminding them of the moral obligations that accompanied the privilege of healing. With each encounter in the hospital, Sarah had gained not only skills as a doctor, but also wisdom as a human being. She resolved to carry forth the lessons learned from the stories of Mercy Springs Hospital, allowing them to shape her approach to medicine and the care she provided. The faces of her patients would no longer be just names on charts. They would be vibrant lives deserving of empathy, compassion, and dignity. As she stepped out into the brightening morning, Sarah felt a sense of renewed purpose. The echoes of the hospital would forever resonate within her, guiding her on her path as she forged ahead. Armed with the knowledge and experiences of those who had come before her, she was ready to embrace the future, not just as a doctor, but as a compassionate advocate for her patients. The stories would continue to live on, urging her to honor their memories through her unwavering dedication to healing and care. Mercy Springs Hospital had left an indelible mark on her soul, one that would guide her in her mission to be the best doctor she could be, one who truly understood that the spirit of medicine was about more than just treating illness. It was about cherishing life in all its forms, honoring the connections made, and ensuring that every story, every heartbeat was remembered.